The phenomenon of human bipedalism is one of the most remarkable evolutionary achievements in the history of biology, representing a complex symphony of neurological signaling, biomechanical leverage, and intricate sensory feedback. For the vast majority of our lives, the act of walking forward is a deeply ingrained, highly automated process that requires virtually no conscious cognitive effort. This automation is primarily governed by the cerebellum, a profoundly complex structure situated at the back of the brain, which houses more than half of the brain's neurons despite occupying only about 10% of its total volume. The cerebellum functions as the ultimate orchestrator of what we colloquially term muscle memory, processing millions of sensory inputs per second to ensure that our forward strides are smooth, balanced, and metabolically efficient. However, as we age, this evolutionary masterpiece of automation can paradoxically become a liability. The constant reliance on heavily worn neural pathways leads to a state of cognitive and physical complacency, where the brain operates entirely on autopilot. This lack of novel motor stimulation contributes significantly to the manifestation of age-related instability, a decline in spatial awareness, and the pervasive, frustrating phenomenon known as cognitive fog. To counteract this multifaceted decline, emerging biomechanical and neuroscientific research points toward a highly effective, elegantly simple, and entirely non-pharmacological intervention: retro-locomotion, or the practice of walking backward. By deliberately reversing the mechanics of our natural gait, we force the central nervous system out of its comfortable state of automation, triggering a cascade of profound biological, neurological, and psychological adaptations that not only restore physical balance but also sharply revitalize cognitive function. Understanding the sheer magnitude of how backward walking achieves these benefits requires a deep dive into the microscopic intricacies of neuroplasticity, the structural biology of our stabilizing tendons, the delicate calibration of the inner ear, and the vital supporting roles of clinical nutrition and psychological resilience. To fully appreciate the neurological shockwaves generated by backward walking, one must first understand the concept of the default mode network and motor automation. When an older adult walks forward down a familiar hallway, the brain relies on predictive processing. The visual cortex registers the environment, the vestibular system in the inner ear confirms the direction of gravity and head movement, and the proprioceptors embedded within the muscles and joints report the physical positioning of the limbs. Because this exact sequence of sensory inputs has been experienced millions of times over decades of life, the brain requires minimal metabolic energy and almost zero active engagement from the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for higher-order thinking, problem-solving, and conscious focus. The nervous system essentially falls asleep at the wheel. When a sudden perturbation occurs, such as a subtle unevenness in a rug or a slightly slippery floor, the automated, age-weakened pathways may fail to correct the posture in time, leading to a catastrophic fall. Furthermore, this lack of cognitive demand during daily movement contributes to a broader neurological stagnation. The brain operates on a strict use-it-or-lose-it principle formerly known as synaptic pruning. When neural circuits are not actively challenged with novel tasks, the connections between neurons weaken, reducing the overall density of the brain's white matter and diminishing the production of essential neurotransmitters. This creeping neural atrophy is a primary driver of brain fog, characterized by memory lapses, poor concentration, a generalized feeling of mental sluggishness, and a diminished capacity to process complex information. Introducing backward walking into this stagnant neurological environment acts as a sudden, intense catalyst for profound brain activation. The moment an individual attempts to walk backward, the predictive models that the cerebellum has relied upon for a lifetime are rendered instantly obsolete. The visual cues that normally guide forward motion are stripped away, as the eyes can no longer see the immediate path of travel. In the absence of this primary visual dominance, the brain panics in the most beneficial way possible. It must immediately shift control from the subconscious, automated regions of the hindbrain to the conscious, highly alert prefrontal cortex and the supplementary motor areas. The brain is forced to rapidly calculate an entirely new set of kinematics, engaging dormant neural pathways that have perhaps not been heavily utilized since the individual was a toddler first learning to navigate the physical world. This massive recruitment of previously inactive neurons stimulates a biological phenomenon known as neuroplasticity, which is the brain's remarkable ability to rewire itself, forge new synaptic connections, and adapt to novel challenges. At the cellular level, the struggle to coordinate backward movement triggers the release of a potent protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. Often described by neuroscientists as miracle-grow for the brain, BDNF acts as a neuroprotectant that supports the survival of existing neurons while simultaneously encouraging the growth of new neurons and synapses, a process known as neurogenesis, particularly within the hippocampus, the brain's central hub for learning and memory. As the circulating levels of BDNF increase in response to the intense cognitive demand of backward walking, the physiological foundation of brain fog begins to dissolve. The mental muzziness that many older adults experience is often linked to diminished cerebral blood flow and a lack of synaptic engagement. The intense concentration required to place one foot behind the other, to gauge the distribution of body weight without visual confirmation, and to maintain an upright posture in a biomechanically unfamiliar direction, demands a massive surge of oxygenated blood to the brain. This vascular flush delivers vital nutrients and clears out metabolic waste products, such as amyloid plaques and cellular debris, which accumulate over time and interfere with sharp cognitive processing. The forced mindfulness of the exercise completely anchors the individual in the present moment. It is virtually impossible to ruminate on anxieties, stress about the past, or drift into a state of passive lethargy while actively trying to balance and move in reverse. The mind must be acutely synchronized with the body, creating a moving meditation that clears the psychological clutter, contributing to cognitive fatigue. Consequently, regular engagement in backward walking not only trains the body to move differently but fundamentally alters the electrochemical environment of the brain, forging a sharper, more alert, and highly responsive cognitive state that permeates daily life long after the exercise session has concluded. Transitioning from the cerebral cortex to the intricate sensory networks of the body, backward walking serves as an unparalleled recalibration tool for the vestibular system and the proprioceptive network. The vestibular system, located deep within the inner ear, consists of 3 fluid-filled semicircular canals and the otolith organs, which work in continuous harmony to detect rotational movements and linear acceleration of the head. As individuals age, the tiny hair cells within these organs can degrade, and the crystals of calcium carbonate that help detect gravity can become dislodged or less responsive. This age-related vestibular decline is a major contributor to vertigo, dizziness, and a generalized sense of spatial disorientation. Forward walking does little to challenge or rehabilitate a fading vestibular system because the brain leans heavily on vision to compensate for inner ear deficits. However, when an individual walks backward, the visual horizon is reversed, and the optic flow, the perceived motion of objects across the visual field, moves in the opposite direction to what the brain expects. This sensory mismatch strips away the visual crutch, forcing the central nervous system to rely almost entirely on the raw data being transmitted by the vestibular organs and the somatic sensors in the limbs. By consistently exposing the vestibular system to this novel, non-threatening challenge, the brain undergoes a process of sensory reweighting. It learns to interpret the slightly degraded signals from the inner ear more accurately and efficiently, essentially turning up the gain on the vestibular amplifier. Over time, this meticulous recalibration leads to a profound improvement in overall balance, making the individual highly resilient to dizzy spells and spatial confusion, whether they are walking backward, forward, or merely standing still. Equally critical to this balance restoration is the hyperactivation of the body's proprioceptive system. Proprioception is often referred to as the body's sixth sense. It is the subconscious awareness of where our limbs are in three-dimensional space without the need to look at them. This vital sense is mediated by specialized mechanoreceptors known as muscle spindles, which detect changes in muscle length, and Golgi tendon organs, which monitor the tension generated by muscle contractions. During decades of forward walking, these receptors habituate to a highly predictable pattern of stretch and compression. Age, physical inactivity, and joint degradation further blunt the sensitivity of these crucial sensors, leading to a sluggish feedback loop between the lower extremities and the brain. When a senior trips, it is often because their proprioceptive system failed to alert the brain to the exact position of the foot in time to make a corrective maneuver. Walking backward violently disrupts this sensory complacency. Because the kinetic chain is reversed, the muscles are stretched and contracted in entirely unfamiliar sequences. The toe reaches back to make initial contact with the ground, a stark contrast to the standard forward heel strike. This novel movement sends an explosive burst of unique, high-frequency signals from the proprioceptors up the spinal cord to the somatosensory cortex. The brain is inundated with fresh data regarding joint angles, muscle tension, and weight distribution. By regularly demanding this heightened level of sensory reporting, backward walking sharpens the proprioceptive acuity of the lower limbs. The muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs become highly sensitized, dramatically decreasing the reaction time required for the body to sense a loss of balance and execute a rapid, life-saving postural correction. Beyond the vast neurological and sensory enhancements, retro-locomotion completely redesigns the biomechanical stresses placed on the musculoskeletal system, offering a revolutionary, non-pharmacological intervention for age-related joint pain and physical instability. The standard human forward gait cycle begins with a heel strike, followed by a mid-stance phase where the foot rolls flat, and concludes with a propulsive toe-off. This repetitive heel strike creates a significant ground reaction force, a shock wave that travels up through the calcaneus bone, up the tibia, and directly into the knee and hip joints. Over a lifetime of walking, running, and carrying loads, this relentless compressive force contributes heavily to the degradation of articular cartilage, leading to the pervasive onset of osteoarthritis, particularly within the tibiofemoral and patellofemoral compartments of the knee. The chronic pain associated with this joint degeneration is a primary reason why many older adults reduce their physical activity, which in turn accelerates muscle atrophy, further compromises joint stability, and initiates a vicious downward spiral of frailty and cognitive decline. Walking backward fundamentally alters this destructive kinetic chain. When moving in reverse, the gait cycle is completely inverted. The individual must reach backward with their leg, making initial contact with the ground using the toes and the ball of the foot. The foot then slowly rolls downward until the heel gently touches the ground. This toe-to-heel strike pattern acts as a profound biomechanical shock absorber. The thick, elastic fascia of the foot, the robust Achilles tendon, and the musculature of the calf absorb and dissipate the kinetic energy of the foot strike before it can ever reach the delicate structures of the knee. For individuals suffering from chronic knee pain, walking backward often feels miraculous, as it allows them to engage in continuous, rhythmic cardiovascular exercise with a fraction of the joint-crushing impact associated with forward walking or jogging. Furthermore, the specific muscular recruitment patterns required for backward walking act as a highly targeted physical therapy session for the stabilizing tissues of the lower body. In forward walking, the primary engine of propulsion is the posterior chain, the hamstrings, gluteus maximus, and calf muscles, while the quadriceps at the front of the thigh play a secondary, decelerating role. When the direction is reversed, the biomechanical demands flip entirely. Walking backward requires the quadriceps, specifically a deeply situated teardrop-shaped muscle located just above the inner knee called the vastus medialis oblique, or VMO, to fire intensely. The VMO is absolutely critical for tracking the kneecap patella correctly within the groove of the femur. In many older adults, the VMO becomes weak and atrophied, allowing the patella to track laterally, causing grinding, inflammation, and severe pain behind the kneecap. By forcing the quadriceps to act as the primary drivers of the backward step, the VMO is isolated and strengthened to an extraordinary degree. As this muscle hypertrophies and regains its lost tone, the kneecap is gently pulled back into its proper anatomical alignment, dramatically reducing friction and pain. In tandem with this muscular strengthening, backward walking places a unique, restorative load on the patellar tendon, the thick band of connective tissue that connects the kneecap to the shin bone. Tendons in aging individuals naturally lose their elasticity, becoming stiff, brittle, and highly susceptible to microtears and tendinopathy. The slow, controlled, eccentric loading of the quadriceps and the patellar tendon during a backward step stimulates the fibroblasts, the cells responsible for producing collagen, to lay down new, healthy connective tissue. This mechanotransduction, where physical force is converted into biochemical cellular healing, actively remodels the architecture of the aging tendon, increasing its tensile strength and restoring its youthful elasticity, thus providing a deeply fortified framework for lower body stability. The profound neurological rewiring and biomechanical remodeling triggered by backward walking do not occur in a biological vacuum. They demand an immense amount of metabolic energy and a highly specific cascade of nutritional support to be fully realized. From a physiological standpoint, walking backward is significantly more metabolically demanding than walking forward at the same speed. Because the movement is less biomechanically efficient and requires greater muscular effort from smaller stabilizing muscles, the heart must pump faster and harder to deliver oxygen to the working tissues. This elevates a slow backward walk into an incredibly effective cardiovascular workout, strengthening the myocardium, improving vital capacity in the lungs, and promoting angiogenesis, the formation of new microscopic blood vessels, throughout the muscular and nervous systems. This enhanced microvascular circulation is particularly crucial for the brain, as the dense network of capillaries that supply the prefrontal cortex and the cerebellum must be robust to support the heightened neural activity and the clearing out of the oxidative stress that drives cognitive fog. However, to truly capitalize on this surge in blood flow and cellular activity, the aging body requires targeted nutritional synergy. The synthesis of brain-derived neurotrophic factor and the creation of new synaptic connections rely heavily on the availability of long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, specifically docosahexaenoic acid, DHA, and eicosapentaenoic acid, EPA. These essential fats, abundantly found in wild-caught fatty fish, microalgae, and specific high-quality supplements, are the primary structural components of neuronal cell membranes. When the brain attempts to rewire itself to accommodate the complex motor task of backward walking, it requires a constant supply of DHA to maintain the fluidity and permeability of the neural membranes, allowing for the rapid and efficient transmission of the electrical and chemical signals required for flawless balance and sharp memory recall. Without adequate omega-3s, the brain's attempt at neuroplasticity is severely blunted, akin to trying to build a sophisticated electrical grid without sufficient copper wiring. Similarly, the physical reconstruction of the tendons, ligaments, and cartilage stimulated by the inverted gait cycle requires specific nutritional building blocks that must be consciously integrated into the older adult's diet. The patellar tendon and the Achilles tendon, which bear the brunt of the restorative loading during backward walking, are composed almost entirely of type 1 collagen, a triple helix protein structure that provides immense tensile strength. As the mechanical stress of walking backward signals the fibroblasts to repair and strengthen these tissues, the body must have an abundant supply of specific amino acids, primarily glycine, proline, and hydroxyproline, to synthesize new collagen fibers. Incorporating high-quality protein sources, specifically collagen peptides, bone broths, and lean meats, provides the raw materials necessary for this structural overhaul. Furthermore, the synthesis of collagen within the human body is entirely dependent on the presence of vitamin C, an essential cofactor in the enzymatic process that stabilizes the collagen molecule. An older adult engaging in this therapeutic movement while deficient in vitamin C and essential amino acids, will experience prolonged muscle soreness and a failure to strengthen the vital joint stabilizers. Alongside these structural components, the metabolic effort of retraining the cerebellum and navigating physical space backward generates free radicals, highly reactive molecules that can cause systemic oxidative stress. If left unchecked, this oxidative stress causes neuroinflammation, which is a potent trigger for the very brain fog that the exercise is attempting to cure. To quench these free radicals and protect the delicate new neural pathways and regenerating joint tissues, the diet must be rich in potent dietary antioxidants. Polyphenol and flavonoids found in deeply pigmented berries, dark leafy greens, green tea, and high-quality extra virgin olive oil cross the blood-brain barrier, exerting powerful anti-inflammatory effects that preserve cognitive clarity and accelerate muscular recovery, creating a perfect internal environment for the body to adapt to the rigors of retro locomotion. Hydration also plays an often overlooked but absolutely critical role in maximizing the benefits of this neuromechanical intervention. The human brain is composed of approximately 73% water, and the intricate electrical signaling required to coordinate unfamiliar backward steps relies heavily on an optimal balance of intracellular and extracellular fluid, governed by electrolytes such as sodium, potassium, and magnesium. Even a mild state of dehydration, which is chronically prevalent in the elderly population due to a diminished thirst mechanism, can severely impair the speed of neurotransmission, manifesting instantly as a sudden loss of balance, confusion, and a thickening of the cognitive fog. Furthermore, the biomechanical benefits of backward walking rely on the shock-absorbing capabilities of the spinal discs, the meniscus of the knee, and the articular cartilage lining the joints. These structures are avascular, meaning they do not possess their own direct blood supply. Instead, they rely on a process called imbibition, where movement, such as the rhythmic compression and release of walking, literally squeezes metabolic waste out of the cartilage and acts like a sponge to suck in surrounding synovial fluid rich in water, oxygen, and nutrients. If an older adult is chronically dehydrated, this synovial fluid becomes viscous and sparse, increasing joint friction and preventing the healing nutrients from reaching the cartilage. Therefore, maintaining robust hydration with electrolyte-balanced fluids is not merely a general health recommendation, but an absolute physiological prerequisite for the success of backward walking as a restorative therapy. The integration of magnesium is particularly vital here, as this mineral is required for the activation of over 300 enzymatic processes in the body, including the synthesis of ATP, the fundamental energy currency of the cell. Without adequate intracellular magnesium, the muscles of the lower body will cramp under the novel strain of backward walking, and the brain will lack the metabolic energy required to sustain focus and banish cognitive fatigue. Understanding the deep biological mechanisms and nutritional requirements is only part of the equation. Implementing backward walking into the lifestyle of an older adult requires a profound sensitivity to the psychological dimensions of aging, particularly the pervasive phenomenon known as kinesiophobia, or the fear of movement. As adults age and experience instances of tripping, stumbling, or suffering a severe fall, a deep-seated psychological trauma begins to take root. The brain, in a misguided attempt at self-preservation, associates dynamic movement with pain, danger, and a loss of independence. This fear is not merely psychological. It manifests physically. When an elderly individual is afraid of falling, their nervous system adopts a defensive posture. The shoulders hunch forward, the gaze drops permanently to the floor directly in front of their feet. The breathing becomes shallow, and the natural arm swing disappears. The gait transforms into a slow, wide-based, shuffling pattern that barely lifts the feet off the ground. Tragically, this fearful, rigid posture actually increases the mechanical likelihood of a fall by destroying the body's natural momentum, stiffening the joints, and keeping the center of gravity dangerously misaligned. asking an individual trapped in this prison of kinesiophobia to suddenly start walking backward, a movement that intentionally removes their visual safety net, seems counterintuitive and deeply terrifying. Therefore, the introduction of this practice must be framed not just as physical therapy, but as a deliberate, progressive cognitive behavioral intervention designed to dismantle fear and systematically rebuild self-efficacy and psychological resilience. The integration of retro-locomotion must begin with extreme care, utilizing the neurological concept of progressive overload, slowly increasing the stimulus to allow the brain and body to adapt safely without triggering an overwhelming stress response. The journey often begins not with walking, but simply with standing and shifting weight. In a highly secure environment, such as a physical therapy clinic or a carefully cleared hallway at home, the older adult can stand between two sturdy parallel bars or with their back to a solid wall. The initial instruction is merely to shift their center of mass slightly onto their heels, engaging the anterior tibialis muscles on the front of the shins, and reaching one foot a few inches backward without fully committing their weight. This microscopic initiation of the movement is enough to wake up the cerebellum and send novel proprioceptive signals up the spinal cord, without pushing the individual into the panic zone. As confidence subtly grows, the practice can evolve into assisted backward walking. Utilizing the parallel bars, leaning heavily on a trusted caregiver, or holding onto a heavy, stable piece of furniture, the individual takes their first complete backward steps. The focus during this phase is entirely on the deliberate, mindful mechanics of the movement. Reaching the toe far back, making gentle contact with the ball of the foot, slowly rolling down through the arch, and finally pressing the heel firmly into the ground while keeping the torso upright and the chest open. This process demands immense patience, as the prefrontal cortex is working at maximum capacity to override the deeply ingrained fear response and coordinate the complex muscular firing patterns. Over the course of several weeks, a profound neurological shift begins to occur. The intense, hypervigilant cognitive effort required for the first few steps begins to decrease. The cerebellum starts to build a new motor engram, a fresh blueprint for backward movement. The brain begins to realize that moving backward is not synonymous with falling, and the paralyzing grip of kinesiophobia begins to loosen, replaced by a blossoming sense of physical empowerment and control. Once the initial fear barrier is breached and the mechanics are established, the practice can gradually transition to independent backward walking in safe, controlled, and open environments. A flat, well-maintained running track, a smooth, empty tennis court, or a clear, level corridor are ideal settings. The goal is never speed or immense distance, but rather impeccable form, rhythmic consistency, and sustained mindful focus. The psychological benefits of mastering this movement independently are staggering. For an older adult who previously felt fragile and vulnerable, the realization that they can safely and confidently navigate the world in reverse represents a monumental victory over their own perceived physical limitations. This newly forged confidence inevitably bleeds into their forward walking and their daily life activities. Because the stabilizing muscles of the knees, hips, and core have been dramatically strengthened, and the inner ear has been finely recalibrated, their forward stride becomes noticeably longer, smoother, and vastly more stable. The shuffling, defensive gait pattern is replaced by a more youthful, upright posture with a natural arm swing, directly reducing the statistical risk of future falls. Furthermore, the persistent fog that once clouded their cognition is consistently blown away by the daily demand placed on the nervous system to remain neuroplastic, alert, and fully engaged with the physical reality of the body in space. The act of backward walking transcends mere exercise. It becomes a daily act of neurological rebellion against the decay of aging, a deliberate choice to force the brain to keep learning, adapting, and growing. The consistency of this practice is paramount. The nervous system thrives on frequency rather than exhaustive intensity. Integrating just 5 to 10 minutes of focused backward walking into a daily routine provides a sufficient, continuous stimulus to maintain the elevated levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, keep the proprioceptive network highly sensitized, and continuously reinforce the structural integrity of the tendons and joints. It is vital to view this intervention not as a temporary therapy to fix a specific ache, but as a permanent lifestyle adaptation, a daily neurological tune-up. As the individual becomes highly proficient over months and years of practice, they can carefully introduce slight variations to continue challenging the brain and prevent the newly formed backward walking circuits from becoming too automated. Walking backward on a very slight incline on a treadmill, with hands hovering over the safety rails, exponentially increases the strengthening effect on the vastus medialis oblique and the cardiovascular demand. Walking backward on slightly uneven natural surfaces, such as a well-groomed flat grass field, introduces microperturbations that further sharpen the reactivity of the ankle and foot stabilizers. Each variation forces the brain to calculate new environmental variables, ensuring that the prefrontal cortex remains actively engaged and that the protective neurogenesis within the hippocampus continues unabated. Throughout all these progressions, the foundational principles remain identical. Prioritize safety, focus on the deliberate toe-to-heel biomechanics, maintain an upright posture, and treat the movement as a form of moving, mindful meditation that demands absolute presence. In an era of modern medicine where the rapid aging of the global population is frequently met with an escalating cascade of pharmaceutical interventions designed to mask joint pain, artificially stimulate sluggish cognition, and chemically suppress anxiety, the science of backward walking offers a profoundly elegant, ancestral alternative. It leverages the body's magnificent, inherent capacity for self-repair and neurological adaptation by simply asking the brain to perform an ancient movement in a novel way. By systematically dismantling the automated forward-walking patterns that lead to muscular imbalances and cognitive lethargy, retro-locomotion forces a total system reboot. It demands that the cerebellum relearn its physical environment, recalibrating the complex interactions between the vestibular fluid in the inner ear, the visual processing centers of the brain, and the microscopic stretch receptors buried deep within our muscles and tendons. It reverses the destructive, compressive forces on the aging knee joint, offering the weary patellar tendon a chance to remodel, heal, and regain its youthful, spring-like resilience. Simultaneously, the immense cognitive effort required to balance and navigate blindly floods the brain with highly oxygenated blood and neurotrophic factors, effectively washing away the metabolic stagnation that manifests as brain fog, leaving behind a sharper, more resilient, and highly adaptable nervous system. By deeply understanding the biomechanics of the gait cycle, the precise cellular mechanisms of neuroplasticity, the vital necessity of targeted nutritional support, and the delicate psychological realities of the aging mind, we can recognize backward walking not as a bizarre fitness fad, but as one of the most comprehensive, scientifically validated, and highly effective non-pharmacological interventions available for restoring holistic vitality, preserving physical independence, and illuminating the cognitive darkness of our later years.